compared to the freezer, I was on Marin, about 50 degrees hotter. Got four lights, four things.
Okay.
We're in a call.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Libertor, rock columnist for the Marin Independent Journal and the Bay Area News Group. Thanks so much for being with us tonight for this panel on rock art and history. It's inspired by the Marin Museum of Contemporary Art's current show, Marin's Rock Art Scene. As some of you may know, at least I do, Marin County can arguably make a case as the birthplace of the Summer of Love. In any event, it has a long and storied rock and roll legacy that we're all very proud of and that I've had the honor of covering for the past, let's say 50 years almost. So before I introduce our panel, a quick word about the Marin Museum of Contemporary Art, AKA Marin MoCA. Located in Novato, California, it's one of the most prominent centers for art in Marin County. It boasts 3 galleries, art classes for kids and adults, as well as 58 studios for working artists. The museum curates 15 contemporary art exhibits each year, including the one on rock art that we'll be talking about tonight. So we have a really great panel for you all tonight. I'm really excited about it. The esteemed rock photographer, Jay Blakesberg, big brother and the holding company drummer, Dave Getz, who is an artist as well as a musician, as you'll soon see, and contemporary Marin musician and producer, Jonathan Cordy. Quite a group. So I wanted to tell of you out there that as questions may occur to you, we'll have a chance to, we'll ask the panel the questions. So during a Q&A at the end, you can write your questions wherever it is you're watching. It could be on Jay Blakesberg's site, on Marin MoCA's site, on the Brooklyn Bowl site, wherever your Facebook site is, there should be a place for you to write down questions. And like I said, we'll get to them at the end. Okay, so why don't we start with Jay, if there's no other further housekeeping to do. So Jay, you began your career as a teenage deadhead from New Jersey, taking photos of your favorite band, is that right? Over the past 30 years, you've become one of the country's preeminent rock photographers and video directors with your work in numerous magazines, Rolling Stone guitar player Relix. You've published books on Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead, Mother Hips, even Hippie Chicks. And you can find a retrospective of his career in the book, Traveling on High Frequency. Jay has 11 photos in the Marin MoCA exhibit, including shots of Tom Waits, which you may be seeing now, I'm not sure, and John Lee Hooker, Sammy Hagar, many others, including the Big Five poster artists whose name I challenge you to know right now, but you will know by the end of this show, I promise you. All right. So Jay, is it fair to say that the Grateful Dead really are the reason that you're a rock photographer now?
I would say that's a pretty good description. You know, I was a pretty typical suburban misspending my youth by pursuing sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the 1970s. I went to high school from 1975 to 1979. But I would say that by my sophomore, junior year, I probably had read Electric Kool-Aid acid tests. I know I dropped acid by the time I was 16, maybe even maybe 15, 16 years old, in the end of 1977. We started reading about the Haight-Ashbury, learning about the history of the Haight-Ashbury. And I think that all, for me, started with the Grateful Dead. I was into the Grateful Dead and I was reading liner notes and I wanted to learn everything I could about them. And, and by doing that, I learned about bands like Big Brother and the Holding Company, who was Janis Joplin's band, and the Jefferson Airplane and Quicksilver Messenger Service and the Charlatans. And so I would say I became, very, very, way more interested in those history lessons than the ones that they were teaching me in high school. Because that was what was important to me. And so, yeah, in 1978, I brought my camera that I borrowed from my dad to a Grateful Dead concert and took my first photos of the Grateful Dead.
Is that what we're looking at now?
No. So these photos here that we're looking at are pictures that I actually took at my first time I ever came to California. So this one here is Bill Graham coming down New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1979. I'm 18 years old. I'm from New Jersey. And I'm basically like, oh my God, like, what is this? What is going on? Like, we had read in like Relix magazine about Bill Graham and what he would do on midnight at New Year's Eve at a Dead show, flying across the auditorium or rolling across it on a globe or a bridge or whatever it might be throughout the years. And, when this happened, for a, little tripping hippie from New Jersey, I was just like, this is the stuff that legend is made of. And so these first couple shots, this is Jerry Garcia with the balloons coming down right at midnight. And then, of course, the balloons with Jerry and Bob and all the confetti. And this is when they're playing Sugar Mag. The place is going crazy. And, and even though I did not take acid that night, I took acid the night before. We made sure that we took enough that we were still high the next night, but I needed to be somewhat sober so I could actually expose film in my camera. And so these first photos that we're looking at are all from 1979 in that run. And then this is the last one here. And then we get to the shots from 1978 this was the second time I photographed the Grateful Dead. And this is a shot of Bob Weir, Donna Gottschall, and Jerry with Bill Kreutzmann in the background. And this particular show was at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey. And it was a Deadhead only show. You had to send a letter to a special P.O. box in San Rafael, California, even though it was a New Jersey show. And you had to request these tickets. And we didn't know about it because there was no internet. There was no information about this. You had to just know. And we wrote a letter to the box office, basically saying that the dog ate my letter, which was the letter they sent you back that allowed you to buy your tickets with a special number on it. And it turned out that a friend of mine, his mother, was friends with the mother of the guy that worked in the box office there, and they gave us 2 tickets. And so I got to go to the show. And this was November 24th, 78. It was right around Thanksgiving. And Garcia was incredibly sick with the flu this night. He could barely even sing. And the next night they played in Connecticut, except for they never played. They got there, everybody came into the show, everybody dropped acid. They turned the lights down, and Bob Weir came out and said, Garcia is really sick with the flu, and he cannot perform, and we're canceling the show. And of course, I've heard this story from I was not there, a million different people that just like were wandering around, downtown, tripping their brains out, like wondering why, they were there without the Grateful Dead playing at that moment. But anyway, so this was the second time I shot the band. And again, I was 16 years old when I took this particular photo right here. This was a week before my 17th birthday. And that's pretty much how I got started.
So what was it? Let me ask you, what was it about the Dead that attracted you so much? Was it the music? Was it the scene? Was it what they represented culturally and the counterculture? What was it that appealed to you as a kid?
I think at first, the first thing you tap into is the music. The second thing you tap into is the culture and the scene. Because like when you're 16 years old and you're going to a show and you don't really know anybody, it takes a minute to connect with people, right? But it's probably easier to connect with people at a Grateful Dead concert than anywhere else that you could possibly go. And if you start going to, more than one show in a week or 2 week period, you start seeing the same people at those shows. So all of a sudden you start making these new friends, right? And those first couple of shows I went to either with my sister or this guy named Craig Lockwood, who was a couple of years older than me that had a car. And, your network sort of builds. And so then all of a sudden you realize that all these other people at Dead shows are like-minded individuals, right? I think it was Bob Weir who once said they're misfits playing for misfits, right? And so, that was kind of us. We were misfits. Like we didn't really fit into the normal script in high school. We were already dropping acid. We already had our minds blown. We'd already listened to Janis Joplin and Dave Getz. Like we had listened to this music on these psychedelics and the whole world became colorful. We read the electric Kool-Aid acid tests or on the road and we're like, I don't want to live in New Jersey anymore. I want to go to San Francisco. I want to live in the Haight-Ashbury, and so there's all these things that are sort of, coursing through your veins and going through your mind about how you can, go on this lifelong adventure because you're realizing that you don't want to stay in small town, suburban New Jersey and spend your life in that kind of experience. And as you go to more shows and meet more people, you become part of that culture and you become part of that scene and you become part of this experiment and this experience to the point where you finally get on a Greyhound bus and you take it to California to see your first Dead shows New Year's Eve in 1979. And you go all 5 nights and you take pictures 3 nights and you drop acid 2 nights and nothing is ever the same again. I mean, right? Think about it.
Yeah, right.
How could it ever possibly be?
And you've gone on to develop a relationship with the band. You've shot them many, many times. I think it's interesting that these early photos of yours are the ones that are in the show. So they've endured, they've lasted. You were good enough then, even as a kid. You know, you must have had something that you saw or felt in yourself.
I guess I had an eye, as they say. You know, like I was able to compose a photo, and I understood the mechanics of the science of exposing film. You know, there were no digital cameras, there was no point and shoot, there was no auto exposure. I mean, you actually needed to know how to expose film properly, and we would shoot film and develop it in the basement in the darkroom at my mother's house, and look at it and say, okay, I learned this from that. If I try this, you know, like I shot Dylan my senior year in high school at Madison Square Garden. I think I shot 4 rolls of film, and I think there's 4 pictures that are actually in focus and exposed properly. Right. So, you know, nowadays, if I would shoot 4 rolls of film, which I don't shoot film anymore, but if I shot 4 rolls of film, every single shot's going to basically be exposed properly. And yeah, I might miss my focus, but in general, like I know, you know, you can shoot a whole roll of film, but back then you were learning and experimenting. And yeah, I guess I had an eye and I liked it. I liked the feeling of developing that 8x10 in that soup in the basement, you know, in the dark with the red light and the magic of that. All of a sudden, Jerry Garcia face popping up in that you know, primordial ooze of that darkroom chemistry, and you know, and then giving those 8x10s to my friends and having them thumbtack them to their bedroom walls, and you'd go to their house to smoke pot, you know, when their parents weren't home, and you'd be like, oh, there's my picture of Jerry, and it made you cool. It was like social media, right? You know, it's like my earliest form of social media, giving my friends 8x10 glossies and sharing that work.
Were these pictures published? Were these some of your first ones to get published, these ones?
These were probably published at some point. You know, I tapped into Relix magazine. I was first published in Relix magazine in 1978. I saw Yorma at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey, followed his limousine into New York City after the show. He stopped at a delicatessen. I took a photo, mailed it to Relix magazine, and they published it as a letter to the editor with the story about how we followed the limousine. And I was 16 years old when that happened. And, you know, to be published in a print magazine that you loved, Relix magazine that you read all the time at 16 years old is pretty mind blowing. I mean, nowadays we're published every 30 seconds on social media, but back then it was a very different thing. And so there were little things like that were sort of big wins for a kid that sort of propel you to want to keep doing something like this. And, you know, when I moved to the Bay Area in the mid 80s, I was just shooting every band that I could possibly get in front of to try and figure out how to become a professional photographer. And then in 87, I connected with Rolling Stone magazine and did my first shoot for them in November of 87 when U2 played a free concert in downtown San Francisco. And then we have this photo here that is in this exhibit of Sammy Hagar at the Golden Gate Bridge. And this was taken in May of 89. And by then I was getting portrait assignments from Rolling Stone magazine. Before that, I was just getting live concert reviews and backstage random notes and news items. And slowly but surely, they were moving me to becoming a portrait photographer. And this was a story about what was going on in the Bay Area in the summer. Like, what should you do? Where should you go? Should you go to the Fillmore? Should you go to Slim's? And they interviewed Sammy about his favorite restaurants. And they hired me to do the shot. And Sammy at the time owned Sausalito Cyclery right over the bridge there in Sausalito. And this was his mountain bike. You could see it says the Red Rocker on it. And he met me up there. And, you know, I didn't get any permits to shoot up there. Now, if you did this, the park police would come up and slap you with a fine. But, you know, back then times were simpler. And I think this might have been either my second or third portrait for Rolling Stone. The first portrait I ever did for them, the first portrait I did for them as an assignment was John Fogerty in federal court getting sued by Saul Zaentz in the lobby of the federal courthouse. I did a portrait of him. But then a real portrait I got hired to shoot was Boz Scaggs when they opened up Slim's. Did a portrait of him at the bar And then I did this shot of Sammy. And this shot of Sammy is the shot that, you know, he loves this. And we've been really good friends ever since. So 31 years. I remember he was down in Mexico getting ready for his big birthday party at Cabo Wabo. Actually, I'm sorry. He was on tour with Van Halen getting ready to do the Mexico thing. And he calls me from backstage. I go, where are you? He goes, I'm on a tour with Van Halen. He goes, that picture of me on the mountain bike, can you make me a 4-foot print? I want to hang it behind the bar at Cabo Wabo for my birthday next month, you know? And I'm like, sure, you know, and that's how Sammy and I became friends. And I've shot albums for him and CD packages and publicity shoots and magazine covers and, you know, all sorts of stuff for Sammy over a 30-year period.
Yeah, that's a great shot. That's one of the most eye-popping ones in the exhibit. How'd you get him to jump like that? What'd you do? He's game, right?
Sammy Hagar, you know, you just say, hey, Sammy, you want to jump? And he's like, yeah, of course, you know. I mean, the thing that's so funny is that Sammy has got to be 70 now, 68, 69, 70, I don't know, right? So, you know, this is 30 years ago. He's 40 years old, right? You know, he's in great shape. I mean, he's like running around with Van Halen. So anyway, why don't we move on to Olompali? I think I've said enough.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, actually, we have one more shot here that's of mine in the exhibit. And this is the one of the big 5 poster artists. We'll see some posters to them later. But again, you know, a shot like this, I just did this on my own. Nobody assigned me to take this photograph. And from left to right, this is Wes Wilson, Kelly, Mouse, Moscoso, and Griffin. And these guys are known as the Big 5. And they were the primary psychedelic poster artists. Of course, there was David Singer and Randy Tootin and, you know, Bonnie McLean, who was Bill Graham's wife. And there was a lot of other guys, but these guys are known as the Big 5 and did these legendary posters. And for me, like, I was always pursuing this pop culture icons that fit into this psychedelic genre for my archive. So I was always looking for pictures of Kesey and Leary and Owsley and Terrence McKenna and Ram Dass and Allen Ginsberg and the poster artists and Bill Graham and all these people, you know, Dave Getz and Big Brother and, you know, bands and icons. And so that's a project I'm working on now, is I'm working on a book of psychedelic icons, people that, you know, who are, you know, important in that genre. And these poster artists are part of that. So
you take that upstairs at the Fillmore. Is that in the poster room at the Fillmore?
That's actually taken at the Psychedelic Shop on Market Street next to Warfield. Also, this is about 30 years ago. I think it's in 88 or 89 also. Yeah, anyway, here's Olompali. Why don't you talk about this, and let's get Dave Getz involved.
Olompali's in Nevada. It's now a state park, but in 1966, the Grateful Dead took up residence there. There was also a commune, a very active commune there at some point. This picture, the first picture, is a Grateful Dead concert, right? I think Dave is the one to really talk to about this, because he was around. You know, there's a shot of Peter Alban there. He was in Big Brother. What do you remember, Dave?
I'm trying to switch this picture from the Big 5, and for some, I'm not. It's not moving.
It's not rolling up.
That's okay. We got it here, Dave. So you can just talk. So we got the Peter Alban dancing with the beer can.
You know, I remember going to a party at Olompali, but I can't tell you a whole lot about it because everybody was getting pretty stoned. So, but I do remember a lot of naked people, and you know, I remember the Grateful Dead being there, and I remember the house was beautiful, and I remember the swimming pool was a big deal, and most people were around the swimming pool. What's interesting about Olompali, though, is that I went there recently with a gal named Noelle Barton, who was one of the people who was part of after the Grateful Dead, or actually during the time the Grateful Dead played there. They were all living there. It was a commune run by a guy named, was it Charles McCoy? I can't think of what his first name was. McCoy is his last name, but he was the leader of this group, and they had a commune there. And he had a lot of money for a while. And I won't get into it, but the whole story of that commune, its rise and its fall, is one of the really great stories of the 60s. It's a quintessential story of the 60s. And there's a movie about it that is really worth seeing if you're interested in Olompali. But the place now is a ruin, and it's a state park, but they haven't done anything to it. And you can go there and park and walk in and see the ruin of the house that the Grateful Dead lived in, and where all these parties were. And there's a big, huge barn, and there's a lot of land. You can walk around. You can go up sort of the side of I forget what the name of the mountain there is.
Mount Burdell.
It's really interesting. The Olompali was a really kind of an amazing story, how it attracted all of these people. And they had this very idealistic, utopian ideas about living together. And Big Brother went through something like that too as a band. We all lived together for a certain amount of time. And when you show the picture of the flag picture, I'll talk about that.
All right, so here's that shot of Janis Joplin that was taken in the city.
Okay.
Do you want to do a proper introduction of Dave here, Paul?
Yeah, let me tell a little bit about what Dave is all about. Dave is best known as the drummer of Big Brother, but he is a fine artist for as long as he's been a musician. And in the Marin Mocha show, he explores the many facets of his late bandmate Janis Joplin's personality in a collage portrait that we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes. Dave was teaching at the San Francisco Art Institute and playing in the Institute's Dixieland band when he joined Big Brother. And they all lived together with Janis after she joined the group in an old hunting lodge in rustic West Marin County in Lagunitas. And that's where they developed the sound that would reverberate around the world on their classic 1968 album, Cheap Thrills. It's one of the masterpieces of San Francisco psychedelic rock. And so there you go, Dave. It's
Okay.
You were there.
Okay, I'm trying to.
So I have the photo up here of the one that's the poster, Dave. If you want to talk about that, the one of you
Okay.
with the band.
This is when, after Janis joined the band was a band before Janis, but then Janis joined the band in June of 1966. And shortly after that, we decided, we all had places in the city then, and we decided we would try to get a place in Marin County and live together. So we found this place almost immediately. It was like advertised in the newspaper, and we drove out to it. And it was this old house that the woman who owned it and was renting it was going through a divorce. And she said it had been a hunting lodge, she said, and Teddy Roosevelt had been there. So we just never really looked into that. We thought maybe it was a myth or that, possible, but it was a very old place, and it was a big, wonderful place with a huge fireplace. And we lived there for a while, and we rehearsed every day. And I think that with the picture of Janis actually was probably right during that time too. But anyway, one day, Victor Moscoso was a good friend of mine because we'd both gone to Cooper Union in New York, Cooper Union Art School together. And when I first came out to San Francisco, where Victor was one of the people that I knew, I came out to go to art school, and Victor and I both went to the San Francisco Art Institute for a while. So we were friends, and Victor wanted to do a poster for a club called The Matrix, which was a popular club in San Francisco at the time that all the bands played at. Marty Ballin and his father owned it. And Victor set up that picture. Victor basically created that picture with the American flag, and he lined up the people in the band. But he wasn't a photographer. I don't even know if he had a camera then. So he brought along Lisa Law as the photographer. So Lisa Law took the picture. But Victor set up that scene. He basically created that picture, but he didn't want to use it as a photograph. He wanted to solarize it, which means reducing all the whites and blacks to their extremes. So he wanted to do that and use it for a poster for The Matrix, and that's the story of that poster. Victor doesn't get enough credit for actually creating that image as an artist. So that's basically it on that about that poster. It's an iconic poster of Big Brother, the setup and the way. I think it just says a lot about 1966 in San Francisco and the bands and kind of who we were and what we were about, what the persona of the band was in that picture.
And it's important to note this is 66, the year before the Summer of Love in San Francisco. So yes. The seed had been sown already, right? With you and the Grateful Dead in Marin County, yes. Getting your chops together, essentially.
Exactly. And during that time that we lived in the house in Lagunitas, which, by the way, I have to just a little for side moment. The house in Lagunitas was actually built by somebody named, say, Clinton Hart Merriam, who was actually one of the first ethnologists in the world, in California or the United States. And he was a friend of Teddy Roosevelt, and he was a friend of John Muir, and he did study the Miwok Indians, and that's where he brought the Miwok Indians to, was that piece of land that we lived in. But we didn't know that until much later about the place. So it was a kind of a magical place. And when we were living there, Janis, the Grateful Dead were living somewhere nearby. Maybe it was the Olompali. I'm not even sure that I can piece the pieces together. But Pigpen started to come over, and Janis and Pigpen really hit it off because they were both blues addicts. They both really loved blues. And they were both in some way sweet, vulnerable people underneath the images that they had, particularly Pigpen, who had sort of like a biker image in a way. And he was really like a very sweet, mild guy. And he loved blues. His father, I think, was a radio DJ that was a blues and R&B DJ somewhere in the peninsula where he grew up. So they really connected, and they had a brief love affair during that time when we were all living out in Marin. It was kind of a magical time, I think. And ultimately, the different living styles of people, when you're living together with people and you don't have one central leader in a way, there were, people who didn't think there was any responsibility for cleaning up or buying food. And then there are other people in the group who want everything clean and, want order and certain kind of, structure. And so there were those conflicting lifestyles within the band started to happen more and more. And eventually we all moved back to San Francisco. But that time in 1966, between July and I'd say December, was a very magical time.
So Janis, you told me once, was very happy at this point, right? I mean, she was kind of fulsome, was that right?
I think so. I think she had a beautiful room. She had the best room in the house. It was like overlooking the woods and the deck below, and it was very private. All of the other places in the house, there were different people, sort of walking through each other. But Janis had a very private space, and she made it very beautiful and very, I hate to use this word, but very feminine, She had little quilts and things like that were like a whole different side of Janis that came out during that time. It was a beautiful time. And we did play a lot, and we developed we played everything. We had a repertoire then of probably about 60 songs, a lot of folk songs, just like the Grateful Dead. The people in Big Brother, like Peter and Janis, were coming out of the 60s folk music and blues, kind of search for authenticity and moving away from the whole pop music thing that we grew up in the 50s. They were looking for some kind of other kind of music that was authentic. And Peter and Janis and Pigpen, as I said before, and James, they came out of that world. I came out of a different world. I had played jazz. I had played a lot of Dixieland jazz, and I toured Europe when I was 19 with a traditional jazz band, Dixieland band, that was very good. And we played on boats, we played on cruise ships and things like that. And I had studied art. I had not wanted to have a primary career as a musician. I loved to play, and I always played, and I was professional from the time I was 15. But I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a painter. I wanted that to be the primary focus of my art, and what I felt I had to say as an artist was through visually. And I didn't, but when the scene started, when the rock scene started, psychedelic scene started in San Francisco, I had a studio in the Mission District where I painted, and I met Peter Albin, who was the bassist in Big Brother. And that's how we made a connection. And I had heard different bands play. I'd heard the Charlatans, and I'd heard the Mystery Trend and a few other bands. And I thought, I'd like to be in one of these bands, it'd be kind of good. And then when I met Peter, that's, through that connection, they had started already as a band, but they hadn't really developed their energy, their sound. And anyway, I became the drummer in that band, and I was still painting, and I was still teaching at the San Francisco Art Institute, and I had to make a very big decision in my life when the band all decided we were going to move together. I had to give up my studio. I had to give up my job at the San Francisco Art Institute. And I had to say, I'm now going to be a rock and roll musician for a while.
No regrets. Can you talk about your art a little bit, about the Janis collage that you did? Or can we see that one? Is that one up?
Yeah.
She's a complicated person with a lot of, people think of her as this tragic figure in some ways, but there was a lot more to her than that.
Absolutely. And when I thought about doing a portrait of Janis, I couldn't do something that was just like one iconic pose, which a lot of posters of Janis are like, her singing, holding the microphone and screaming with her mouth open. I knew that side of her, but I knew so many other sides of this person. But when I did that painting, you have to understand that when I'm doing something like that, I'm not a rock musician who's making art. I'm a painter, basically, who happens to play the drums. And I'm thinking as a painter when I do a piece like that. So I'm thinking about different things. I'm thinking about creating something, one that's a visual experience, that's a total visual experience. And I'm thinking about what the subject matter is. The subject matter in this case is Janis. It's a very personal subject matter to me. So it's not something like I'm doing a picture of a car or something like that. I'm doing something that I'm involved in that way. And then I want to say something. I want to take the viewer, not just show a picture of Janis. I want to take them on a trip in some way visually. And that's what painting's about. So I'm thinking as a painter. I'm not thinking as a musician. The musician fact is the subjective part, or the coincidental part, that I happened to play for 3 years in a band with this person. And I loved her as a sister, and I knew a lot about her and spent a lot of time with her. So I had a lot of experiences to express. And that is what I'm trying to say. That is essentially the content of the piece. The subject matter is Janis, but the content is all of the things about her that one wants to express, that I would like to express about her, and at the same time to put it together in a unified way visually, so that it reads as a painting, as it reads as a piece of art. I'm sure Jay knows, and anybody who is a visual artist knows what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of pain in that central image of her that you repeated several times, which I don't know. Did you see that? Did you see this coming? I mean, she seemed to be in a pretty good place when she passed away. And what was it, 70 or?
You mean her death? No, I didn't see it coming, except now. Now I don't know how you couldn't see it coming, but at that time, no. I think a lot of us were doing a lot of different drugs. I never was strung out on heroin, although I tried it a bunch of times. But we thought we were invulnerable. All of us thought we could use different substances like that. And first, of course, with a lot of people say at first it was like just smoking pot and psychedelics. This is not true, because Janis and some of the other people in Big Brother and some of the people in other bands actually had done a lot of crystal methadone and speed before the psychedelics came along. Janis in particular had a history of being, I want to say drug abuse, but having drugs take her life down in some way. And she had to go back to Texas. And when she joined Big Brother, she was very afraid of coming back into the San Francisco scene and that whole world where she had been a crystal meth addict, and that happening to her again. And of course, within a short time that she was back and we were living in Lagunitas, that was happening again. So, and she was very scared of like acid. She did take acid about 2 or 3 times. And she did it the first time she did it with Ellen Harmon, who was a woman who founded the Family Dog, actually, with Jack Tolles and Alton Kelly. And Chet took it over later on. But Ellen Harmon was like a very strong figure in the early days of the scene. She was one of these people from Detroit that was around Big Brother and sort of really like a leader in the counterculture movement in San Francisco. And Janis trusted her as a woman who was equal to her. And that's when she took acid for the first time.
Well, great. It's a striking picture, and I urge everybody out there to see this show. I'll give you a little info on how you can do that at the end, but shall we move on to Jay? Are we going to do the Joan Baez now?
Yeah, Mimi and Joan, but I want to remind everybody, send in your questions on Facebook at the Marin Mocha Facebook page or the Jay Blakesberg Photography Facebook page. Anywhere where you're watching on Facebook, send your questions and we'll hopefully get to them at the end of the program. But yeah, we got the Mimi and Joan stuff up here right now. Paul.
Joan, of course, stopped touring last year and is devoting herself full time to being a fine art painter. She's done. She had a show of her own. The first show she had in 2017, actually before she quit, called Mischief Makers, with all the socially conscious activists that she admired. That was at my full disclosure. It was my wife's gallery, Seeger Gray Gallery in Mill Valley. And there's a picture of Joan and Mimi. Mimi, of course, founded Bread and Roses in 1974, the nonprofit organization that exists to this day and bringing live entertainment and music to people who are shut away in institutions, anywhere from senior homes to prisons and youth facilities and things like that. And, they provide a really great service. The beach photo there is, that's taken, Jim Marshall took, right, Jay, on the beach at Carmel when they were both very young and living down there. I think Mimi was with Richard Fariña at that time. And there's a photo of the group backstage at the 25th anniversary of Bread and Roses at the San Francisco War Memorial Opera House. And there's a lot of people. Mimi was sick with cancer at that time. That's why she has that beautiful silver turban on her head. She had been in chemotherapy and had lost a lot of her hair. So she wore that beautiful, looked just as beautiful then as she ever did. And so it's quite a group. There's the Doobie Brothers back there, Chris Christopherson, Jackson Brown. Who else, Jay? Bonnie Raitt.
Joplin, Father Guido Sartucci, Pete Seeger, Robin Williams, Bonnie Raitt.
Yeah. There's also a picture that I think was probably taken at one of the great festivals she did at the Greek Theater in Berkeley in the 70s. That's when I got to know her best. I think I wrote one of the first stories about Bread and Roses in 1974 when it just began. But we got to know each other when she put on these amazing 2 or 3 day festivals. Just look at these people. There's Norton Buffalo, there's Cantner, Ricky Lee Jones, Pop Stables, Todd Rundgren. Yeah, those were great shows. And what do we have up?
David Crosby, the painting. So
David Crosby, yeah. He came to her house. She tells this little story. She came to her house to interview her for a documentary on him that she was quoted in and pictured in, and that she painted the photo after that. I think it's interesting because it's so spare. It kind of says a lot about him, doesn't it? She's done a series of rock pictures. This is one of them that's in the show. There's also this picture from a photograph of Mimi again performing. And then after that, this one with sort of the beaded headdress that she has on, that was taken in. That was photographed taken in 1977, I think it was. 1967, when she was a member of the committee in San Francisco, the comedy troupe. And this picture is now available. You can buy there's 100 limited edition prints of this portrait of Mimi painted by Joan that for $1,000, a donation of $1,000, you get this beautiful picture of her, and it helps support the work of Bread and Roses. Yeah. So, you get this great piece of art and help them at the same time.
Yep. Now we're on to Village Music, Paul.
Village Music. So Jonathan Cordy, thanks for standing by here. Let me just tell a little bit about Jonathan. You've been a leading figure on the Marin music scene as a producer, nightclub manager, musician for 3 decades now, even though you're the youngest one of us, probably, or close to it. A keyboard player and a singer. You're currently a member of the top local band Soul Ska and Coolerator. You grew up in Mill Valley. Your first band, the instrumental powerhouse Vinyl, was influenced by the vinyl records that you grew up listening to at John Goddard's legendary Village Music Store in Mill Valley. And there it is. Nice shots. You got the fisheye kind of the look of it.
It's like a museum. I love taking these photographs. I mean, this was just like Village Music at its peak. And of course, we all know that Village Music was the favorite record store of Tom Waits and Elvis Costello. I mean, when Elvis Costello came to the Bay Area, he always went to Village Music. And of course, he played John Goddard's holiday parties as well.
Yeah. So Jonathan, what do you remember? Tell us about the experience of living in Mill Valley in those days.
Yeah. Well, I guess that I represent the next generation, being born in 1968. My contemporaries were some of the children of a lot of the hippies and the 60s rock stars. I grew up with the children of Grace Slick and Paul Kantner and Nick Gravenitis and the Grismans and Maria Muldaur and Jesse Colin Young and Bill Kreutzmann. All their children are my contemporaries. And my father was a filmmaker. He was a well-known filmmaker here in Mill Valley. Yeah. And I do remember as a child, they were making the animated introduction to the Grateful Dead movie in his film studio in Mill Valley. And I used to go into that office and watch the Skeleton movie. And I loved the Skeleton movie as a kid. I had no idea what it was, but it was being made by one of my dad's employees, Gary Gutierrez, who went on to film Found Colossal Pictures. But I do remember that and thinking, wow, what is that? That skeleton riding the motorcycle is super cool. But as a kid, first walking into Village Music, my mind was completely blown. Mill Valley was a wonderful, funky town to grow up in. But if you walked into that record store, you knew that something very special was going on in there. And there were certain kids that got really drawn into it. Other kids, they didn't really pay it much mind, but many of us understood how important that record store was. And the posters on the ceiling were the first thing that drew me in. And I used to go in there as a kid and just stare at the walls and the ceiling for hours. And I would see these names, the Electric Flag, Moby Grape, the Sopwith Camel, Big Brother, Quicksilver. What are these names and who are these bands? I was just fascinated by the artwork. I mean, it was mind-boggling. And I slowly developed a relationship with John Goddard, who was the owner. And I would ask him, about things. And when I was about 11 years old, I used to listen to a radio station in Marin called KTIM. And KTIM was broadcasting out of San Rafael, and they had a Blue Monday party every Monday that broadcast from a place called Uncle Charlie's in the Paradise Shopping Center of Corte Madera. And it was hosted by Mark Naftalin. And Mark Naftalin is a piano player who from Chicago came out here and is part of the Butterfield Blues Band. And I would listen to these performers on my radio at night going to sleep, like Charlie Musselwhite, Queen Ida, Luther Tucker, and it was incredible, unbelievable music. And that's where I fell in love with the blues. And I started going into Village Music and asking John Goddard, I'd like to get an album by Howlin' Wolf. Can you help me? I would like to get an album by Muddy Waters. And so I started with the blues, but then I started asking him, I'd like to get an album by Quicksilver Messenger Service. Who is that? And he would say, oh, you go over here and you get those, And I knew enough about the blues to realize that when I started listening to Quicksilver and Big Brother and Country Joe and the Fish and Iron Butterfly and It's a Beautiful Day and all these bands that I began to collect their albums, I started to realize that there's a lot of blues in there, you know? And of course, Cheap Thrills changed my life. I mean, it was an unbelievable album. And, you know, I started realizing that the blues was the germination of the psychedelic rock. And then, in my opinion, these musicians started taking acid and it became completely another thing. And it was so amazing. I started going to Grateful Dead shows when I was about 13. And I guess the one thing I should say is growing up in Mill Valley, we were all very aware that Jerry Garcia lived up on the mountain, that Bob Weir lived up on Summit. We knew that Sammy Hagar lived in town, and Carlos Santana and Bonnie Raitt and Maria Muldaur and Dan Hicks and Marty Ballin. All these people lived in town. We'd see them at 7-Eleven. And we knew our town was special. But it wasn't until I started going to these Grateful Dead shows as a kid that I started to realize who these people were and what they did and how incredible it was. I went to probably about 50 Grateful Dead shows, a lot of New Year's Eve shows, and I had some very liberating experiences. And I have to say that I really felt the freedom to dance at a Grateful Dead show. And, you know, people talk about hip hop culture and how hip hop has the art, the music, the dance, you know, the break dancing. Well, I feel like the psychedelic scene very much has the same thing. There's the art of the posters. There was the music going on with the psychedelic, and there was also the dance and the culture. And yeah, I had some of my first really liberating experiences at Grateful Dead shows, dancing with complete abandon in the hallways of Berkeley Community Theater, and really having the greatest time of my life. I mean, covered in sweat, dancing with complete strangers all night. I mean, it was incredible. So I really drew a lot of inspiration from the Grateful Dead. As I got into music later in life, you know, we started a band called Vinyl in 1995, and that band was designed to make people dance. We felt that there were too many DJs on the music scene in the Bay Area at the time. And so we named the band Vinyl in an effort to say, we will be the album that plays. Rather than the vinyl album, we'll be the live band that makes you dance. And we're going to keep it in a seamless set so that you don't stop dancing. And we'll switch it up from Latin to reggae to funk, but we want to keep you dancing. And so I really draw that inspiration from what I learned at Grateful Dead shows and from the psychedelic rock, which is that really liberating feeling of dancing that comes at Grateful Dead shows. I mean, if you look at some of the early footage, I think of the 60s, I've seen some footage at the Fillmore where everyone's just kind of bobbing up and down. They're not really dancing. But the Grateful Dead shows I used to see, people were freaking out, spinning around, jumping and doing, you know, acrobatic dancing all night long. And I think that's one of the great legacies of psychedelic rock. I've probably taken too long.
No. So how did Sweetwater fit into this now, then?
Well,
the original Sweetwater was in Mill Valley from about 1979 to 1999, under Jeannie Patterson, and you were there. That's your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, for sure. Much of the same way that we knew something very special was going on at Village Music, we knew something was very special inside Sweetwater. And as a kid, there used to be a tree outside there, and we would climb the tree and stare in the top windows above the door and watch the music. And I wasn't exactly sure what was going on in there, but I knew it was special, and I knew it was crowded, and I knew it sounded good. As I got older, I was able to get in there when I was 21, and I can remember some incredible nights of music. First time seeing bands like the Dirty Dozen brass band from New Orleans, seeing Ralph Stanley and his tour bus pull up, and watching 15 guys in gray cowboy suits and hats walk in and play the most incredible music, that the next day I went up to John Goddard's store and bought every Ralph Stanley album I could find. You know, seeing bands from New Orleans, I mean, the roots music that came through that Jeannie Patterson brought to the original Sweetwater was so amazing. and everyone that was able to witness it saw something really special. And it was a complete dream come true that our band Vinyl ever got to play on that stage. I mean, we brought a little tape down to Jeannie and played it for her and asked for a Tuesday night. We got a Tuesday in 1995, and then we sold it out. We got a Wednesday, then we got a Thursday, and we ended up playing the original Sweetwater, I think, almost 200 times.
Wow.
Many parties, many Halloweens and New Year's. We played it many times a year, and it's just a great memory. I love the new Sweetwater, but of course I'll never forget the original Sweetwater. But the collaborations between John Goddard and Jeannie Patterson were some of the most incredible things. And I know, Paul, you remember this, probably you all remember this, but you know, when John Goddard would put his muscle behind something and make something happen and bring someone like little Jimmy Scott to the Sweetwater, or bring someone like Betty LaVette.
I'll never forget Betty LaVette.
I mean, you know, and probably one of the greatest nights I ever saw at the Sweetwater. I went into Village Music and I was shopping, and John Goddard said, "What are you doing tonight?" I said, "I don't know why." And he said, "You should go to the Sweetwater." And I said, "I should?" He goes, "Yeah." So I went down there at about 5 o'clock and I started standing in line, and I didn't know what was going on. The windows were blacked out. There were cameramen going in and out and things. And I got a ticket somehow. Two of my friends, we got in, we sat by the stage, and we got to watch John Lee Hooker and the Coast to Coast Blues Band with special guests Carlos Santana, Robert Cray, Charlie Musselwhite, Bonnie Raitt. I mean, the list went on and on and on. It was one of the most mind-blowing things I've ever experienced. And I'm actually a harmonica player. That was my first instrument because I love the blues. And I had my harmonicas with me, and I was standing by the stage, and Carlos walked by, and I said, "Carlos, you need a harmonica player tonight?" And he said, "Sure, come on up." And I looked at my friend, and I just about went to the bathroom in my pants, and I just looked at him, and I go, "Oh my God." And I start stepping on the stage, and the leader of the Coast to Coast Blues Band says, "Not tonight, man, not tonight."
Hey, Paul, I just want to point out that the original Sweetwater only held what, 75 or 80 people. So when Jonathan is talking about seeing Carlos Santana and Bonnie Raitt and Albert Collins and Charlie Musselwhite and John Hammond Jr. and all these people play with Carlos Santana, or I was showing a minute ago, Jerry Garcia and Elvis Costello, or 15 people in Ralph Stanley's band playing on that stage. That stage was only about 10 feet wide by about 6 feet deep, right? And the room held 75 or 80 people. And so you're, like Jonathan saying, you're watching Carlos Santana jam with John Lee Hooker and Albert Collins, the blues legend, on the stage, and there's only 75 people in there. Yeah. Like, that was what also made this incredibly special, is that Sweetwater, you know, and I became really good friends with Jeannie also, and saw lots of great things there, and John Lee Hooker's birthday, and saw Tom Waits come and hang out, and Bob Weir, and Sammy Hagar, and Jerry Garcia, and like you said, John Goddard had all these incredible parties there. And I became friends with Jeannie, and I was recently going through a bunch of my archives and found all these really nice letters. You know, get that incredible handwriting that you've never seen anybody write like Jeannie wrote. And she would just write these thank you notes. I'd send her some 8x10 prints, which you can see some of them hanging on the wall in some of those other photos that I was showing you with before. If we go back a couple here, up on the left there's a picture of Bob Weir, John Lee Hooker, and Jeannie Patterson that I have up there right now. And she would write me these thank you notes with this handwriting that I can't even describe. It was so mind-blowing. But the Sweetwater truly was a unique and special place in Marin County history. And I saw so many great shows there also that I feel very blessed to have had that experience as well. And of course, the new Sweetwater is amazing, but that holds 250 people, and it's a very different scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jeannie died last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a very sad time for all of us and for Mill Valley, because she brought so much to this town, to that town, and to Marin County, and to music in general.
Yeah.
When did Village Music close?
Ooh, you know, Elvis Costello closed Village. He played a little concert inside. I was lucky enough to have been crammed in there with a couple of other people while he played this gig, but I can't remember the date. Anybody remember? You, Jonathan?
What was it?
when did Village Music close? I forget the year.
Oh, 2005, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, for a lot of us, it was a trifecta that we refer to. Village Music closed, the Sweetwater closed, and Charlie Deal passed away.
Okay. Yeah. Charlie Deal of the famous toilet seat guitars.
Yes, the legendary Charlie Deal of Mill Valley. It was like a symbol of the old Mill Valley, and when he passed away, it really felt like a page was being turned.
Yeah. He was great. One of the great characters
Mm-hmm.
in rock.
Is that one of the guitars? Is that toilet seat guitar the one in the 2 a.m. club and the Huey Lewis and the News?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I never knew that. Okay. Right.
Charlie was great. He played a lot with with a lot of guys around town. With John Cipollina. They actually had a little band together early on. You know.
Yeah, he used to call his bass guitars four flushers.
So, Paul, do you want to breeze through these posters and then talk about or open it up to questions, maybe?
Yeah, let's do that. Right. Yeah, we should open up for questions pretty quick. I could tell you a little bit about the Skull and Roses photo because a couple of years ago, Marin Mocha, interestingly enough, had a retrospective of his work. And I remember interviewing Stanley Mouse Miller. We're standing there, we're looking at this picture, and I'm asking him, what's the story behind that? And he and his partner, Alton Kelly, created it in 1966 on the eve of the Summer of Love. It's for a Grateful Dead show at the Avalon. And at that point, he says, the old story is that we got a job to do a poster for this band called the Grateful Dead, he said, smiling at the memory. Nobody knew who they were, of course. They were just another new band with a great name. And so he and Kelly used to go to the public library and look for images that they could use in their posters. Something kind of groovy for our posters is the way he put it. And one day they came across a book, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and they found this picture in it. And he says, wow, this has the Grateful Dead written all over it. We used this for this poster and they made it their logo. It's probably the most famous image we ever did. And maybe one of the most famous posters of all time too.
And so, I'm going to add to that story because Mouse has told it to me as well, that the story is that they made a photocopy of it out of the book. But the real story is that Kelly took out his penknife and cut it out of the page and stole it from the library. And Mouse said to me, he goes, I can say that now because it was 40 years ago or 45 years ago, and the statute of limitations is up. And Mouse lost that little piece of paper out of the book for many years. And I was up at Mouse's studio about 3-4 years ago, right before they did that exhibit at the DeYoung Museum here in San Francisco with the Summer of Love. And he pulled it out and showed it to me. And he found it in a box, the original page that he cut out. I have a picture that I didn't even have my camera. I took it on my phone, a picture of Mouse holding up the original page that Kelly had sliced out of the book when he originally created that piece of artwork. So yeah, very, very legendary for sure. So there's a few more posters in here real quick. I'll just breeze through them. I put another photo in here of the big 5 poster artists. These are the guys that created all those Avalon and Fillmore posters. Again, Griffin, Moscoso, Kelly, Wilson, and Mouse. There's a few posters that we had in here first that were from Marin County. There was a club called Pepperland, which, Dave, where did you say Pepperland was?
It was on East Francisco Boulevard, where Litchfield's hotel is.
The Bermuda Palms Motel.
I know where you're talking about now. That's over by where Tarpon Crossroads is now, right?
Near there.
Further south.
Right, okay. The New Riders at the Matrix, the poster artist. Here's the Skull and Roses again. Another family dog poster for the Avalon Ballroom with Quicksilver and the Sons of Champlin. New Year 67, 68 with the Airplane and Big Brother and the Holding Company and Quicksilver. And I like how they say it's the Fillmore scene at Winterland. So you could see how it was growing at this point, 67 to 68, the Summer of Love. And, really, Dave, I'm sure you could confirm this, that the Summer of Love really was in 1966. And
we all pretty much agree on that. The Summer of Love was before the Summer of Love. And
Yeah.
the actual 67 Summer of Love was basically a creation of the media that, it happened. I mean, thousands and thousands of people came to San Francisco looking for
Every single person I've ever talked to that was in the Haight at that time said that the pure, true Haight-Ashbury Summer of Love was in 66,
Yeah.
Even before the Human Being in January of 67 and long before the summer of 67, which, like you said, is the media fabricated into this
Definitely.
thing where all the runaways came to San Francisco. But as you can see in 67, 68 for New Year's Eve from this poster, they moved the show to Winterland because there was 8,000 people instead of 1,000 at the Fillmore. Here's another Fillmore Auditorium poster with Quicksilver and Big Brother and the Grateful Dead. Quicksilver as the headliner, Grateful Dead as below Big Brother and the holding company. And then, of course, the 13th floor elevators with Great Society and the Herb Green portrait of Grace Slick before she joined the airplane in the center of it. I love how these poster artists were using Herb Green's photos and Lisa Law's photos and some of the other Haight-Ashbury photographers. Some memorabilia. Harrison, do we have any questions?
Yeah, let's do some questions there.
Yeah, definitely do. So I guess we can start with one about posters. How do you feel poster art has changed over the years, and what trends have you all liked or disliked?
You want to take that, Jay?
Sure, I'll start and you guys can kick in. As a kid growing up, like I said, in high school in New Jersey, the first posters I became aware of were the big five, the Avalon and the Fillmore posters. They just blew my mind, just staring at them for hours, whether we were on acid or not, and trying to decipher what they said. And I've collected a lot of them. I have a lot of stuff framed in my studio, and I have flat files with hundreds and hundreds and maybe even thousands of posters in them that I have no room to hang up nor the money to frame them. But the posters that I do have framed is a Rick Griffin, Big Brother and the Holding Company poster, and Flying Eyeball, and all those original posters. And then for me, I got turned on when I moved to the Bay Area in the late 80s. There was a guy named Frank Kozik, and another guy named Coop, and they started making these crazy, cartoonish, colorful, saturated posters for like the Butthole Surfers and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. And then from there, I feel like the poster thing exploded to where it is now, where every show you go to for every band, you can buy a limited edition, silk screen, sign, number poster from any number of incredible artists out there. I mean, Chuck Sperry is one of the, faves, Chris Shaw, Alexandra Fisher, even Dennis Larkins, who did a lot of later day Grateful Dead stuff for BGP. He did the Radio City Music Hall and the Warfield in 1980 Grateful Dead posters. And so many of these are legendary. The closing of Winterland with the Grateful Dead, which is called The Blue Rose, done by Mouse and Kelly. There's literally at this point tens of thousands of incredible rock posters. There's a band out of Vermont right now doing a book on their posters of their first 15 years. They're called Twiddle. And they've asked me to write an essay for that book. And I'm talking about how I first got into collecting. But I have flat files on top of flat files on top of archival boxes filled, with Fillmore posters from the 80s and the 90s from every show we've been to. And I love it. It's part of it. Sort of, for me, it reminds me of the shows that I was at and the memories of those people. And then since I'm taking photographs at those shows, it sort of rounds out this picture for me. And I'm a memorabilia junkie collector. If you looked in my office in front of me, I've got 15 Jim Marshall photographs framed, and I've got Chuck Sperry, Bob Dylan poster framed in the back there. And, over there, if you can see, that's the John Lennon posterized Richard Avedon poster, but that's just the cheap $5 headshot poster. The original print of that thing is $1 million photograph. That's a $5 poster that I bought at the Berkeley flea market and spent $100 or $200 framing it. But it's like, this art for me is inspirational. I'm a very visual person, and those visuals just sort of turn me on. And I love these bands. I love Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holding Company. I love the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane. And so to have these posters in my life makes me feel good. It's sort of the story of my life in posters along with my photographs, but it, ultimately they just make me feel good, and I love taking them out and flipping through them every once in a while, and I probably have a few things that are valuable and I don't even know it, but I always joke that someday my kids will sell it all on eBay when they're sick of it or done with it.
Any other
One
questions?
of the things that you have to understand about the posters is the common idea before this all started of what a poster should be in advertising art was this idea that a poster should be direct and get its message across in the first few seconds. So you had to be very clear. The idea that was taught in art schools about, this kind of graphic art and poster design was the lettering to be very readable and to get the message across quickly and clearly within the first few seconds. And when the psychedelic poster artists came along, it's almost like they took every rule and took the opposite approach to it. So in other words, we'd put a poster up and the people who were straight people basically say, what the hell does that say? I can't read that. But the people who are the counterculture people who were getting high would look at it and say, wow, far out that says Jefferson Airplane, Fillmore Auditorium, you'd have to take time to read it. It would take time to get its message across. And sometimes the connections were obscure. The first Big Brother poster that I ever saw before I was in the band just blew my mind because it said Big Brother and the Holding Company, Open Theater in Berkeley. And I knew Big Brother was a band, but the picture was a yogi sitting on a bed of nails. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. That makes that you have to make a connection. It's not made for you. The mind has to go somewhere to understand these things. So that was really what the real difference, the basic difference between this new thing of psychedelic posters. And now it's pretty much accepted. You have guys like Kozik and great poster artists now, but they're standing on the shoulders, I think, of people like Mouse and Kelly and Victor and Rick Griffin and Wes Wilson, who really had to really go against the whole grain, the whole accepted idea of what a poster is supposed to be.
And in the old days, Dave, the original, like what you're talking about, we'll call it, 50s and 60s boxing style posters with, big block letters with the name of the band or the artist or whatever the event was. That was disposable art in a lot of ways. Whereas these posters, people were taking them off the telephone poles or out of the windows and hanging up in their houses as art, right? So that was the first big transition with the psychedelic posters where posters actually became fine art, even though they were a penny a piece or a nickel a piece or whatever it was to print at the time. Now they're thousands of dollars, and it was really the transition.
They were also in a previous time, like if you go back to the Belle Epoque in France at the turn of the centuries, where you had artists like Toulouse-Lautrec and Mouchet and people like that, and some of the German new art artists. But that was lost for many, many years. And actually, Wes was one of the first people to go back to that period of time and look at the lettering, some of the things that were done, and take ideas from those posters.
Good stuff. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have a couple more.
Okay.
This question is for Dave, and it's coming from somebody named Simon. Did you have a favorite song to perform with Janis Joplin?
Really, no. It changed over time. Toward the end, before Janis left the band, we really had it down, our set to kind of like 9 songs. And they were, the ones that we just really knew, and that people knew, and mostly Cheap Thrills. But I still, Summertime and the way Big Brother and Janis did Summertime, I still think is probably one of the most original things we did. And, Piece of My Heart and Ball and Chain. There were a few other things, but I think those are probably still my favorites to listen to, particularly, I think, Summertime. I think what we did with it was just, kind of really creative and brilliant at the moment.
Agreed.
So we have we have a couple more questions. This question is from Tom, and this question is for everybody. When comparing the music scene of Marin County in the 60s to the music scene of Marin County today, do you feel that the psychedelic magic that bands like the Grateful Dead and Big Brother laid down is still evident?
Yeah, Jonathan, maybe you can talk about the scene today. You're an active musician. You're working all the time. I mean,
Well,
it's a pandemic. There's a pandemic going on.
I think if we're going to talk, you have to be, pre-COVID and post-COVID, because I think before the COVID came along, there was a very vibrant scene here. There was really a resurgence going on. And I think you have to point to the new Sweetwater and Terrapin as really invigorating the North Bay music scene in the last 4 years or so. 4 or 5 years, and I felt like things were really popping. But now it's going to be difficult for live music to return, and we're all going to have to figure out how that's going to happen and when people feel comfortable packing together again, either indoors or outdoors. There are some shows that are starting to pop up that are outdoors, but prior to that, I would say yes, the inspirational. I feel like the North Bay and Marin County especially is an area that's very inspirational to artists, not just musicians. And it always has been, always will be. It's the natural beauty of this area is something very special.
Anyone else?
Sweetwater and Terrapin have now been around for 8 years. I think Sweetwater 7 and Terrapin 8. So
yeah,
and you're absolutely right that both of those clubs. And when Bob Weir had TRI Studios open and was doing live streams from there, I like to call it the golden triangle of Marin, TRI, Terrapin, Sweetwater. And, if you had said to any of us deadheads, even you, when you were dancing at the Berkeley Community Theater, in the 80s or the 90s or whatever, at Grateful Dead concerts, that in 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years, when Jerry Garcia would be gone, you could go down to the Sweetwater on any Tuesday night and there'd be a good chance Bob Weir would be sitting in with somebody, or you can go to Terrapin Crossroads 4 nights a week and watch Phil Lesh from the Grateful Dead reinvent and reinterpret the Grateful Dead songbook over and over again and blow minds with only 300 people in the room. You would have been like, yeah, that's pretty funny. That would never happen in a million years. And so, the Marin County music scene, I think, like you said, when both of those clubs, Terrapin and Sweetwater, I mean, it's always been going on with 19 Broadway and, other different venues, and the Trident and Sausalito in the 70s and different places like that. But I think that in the last decade with these new venues and with Bob and Phil anchoring them, it's been mind blowing. And we had a big run, obviously, at the old Sweetwater before that, until the late, until 20 years ago, basically. But I live in San Francisco, but believe me, I've seen a lot of incredible music in Marin, and feel very grateful that that it sort of is part of the whole vortex of the Bay Area. Yeah, it happened at Haight and Ashbury, but even like Dave was saying, in '66, his band was living in Lagunitas, and Dave, the Grateful Dead were living in Olompali only for about 3 months, right. And I believe it was when they came back from LA in the spring of '66 until early, mid, maybe summer of '66. And then that's when they moved into the city and moved into 710 Ashbury. So they were in Marin, like you say, at the same time you were in Lagunitas. Yeah. They were up in Olompali.
They were also in Forest Knolls. They were right nearby. That's how.
Yeah, but they were split up. But yeah, someone were. Yeah, and also, the album, the back.
I think Pigpen was actually living in Forest Knolls.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the back cover of Oxa Moxa was actually photographed at Olompali also.
It's that tree.
Yeah.
And people are still looking for that tree.
I know.
Determine which tree at Olompali it is, if it's still there.
Yeah.
We should mention though that when Dave and his band were renting a house in Lagunitas, things were a bit cheaper, and so the cost of living in the Bay Area has been has made it more difficult for up and coming musicians and artists to be free to follow their muse, I think.
I want to say something about Fairfax a little bit, because before, even before the pandemic, but there was a particular time in Fairfax, which is a town that has 1 million musicians. I'm exaggerating a little, maybe a few hundred, but people like John Cordy. You could go on a Tuesday night to 19 Broadway and hear John Cordy and Danny Uzalewski and their band. And it was a great, incredible, great band. And not a lot of people know about it. And at one point in Fairfax, there were 4 clubs on any given night from Thursday through Sunday that had music. And any one of them you could have walked into and heard a great band that you may never have heard of again. But just great musicians living locally in Fairfax, and clubs that just open themselves up for that kind of thing. And sometimes people would show up, and sometimes just other musicians would be there digging it. And it was just a very wonderful scene. And actually it was like that a little bit in the early 70s with the lion's share. You had bands like Clover who, absorbed themselves into the Doobie Brothers and other bands playing at the lion's share, and not a lot of people except the local scene in that part of Marin, actually Ross Valley and the West Marin would, be there. But it was a very vibrant, incredible scene.
That's when Van Morrison was living here. Van Morrison would be playing there on a weeknight, or David Bromberg.
Oh,
or
sure.
Moby Grape into Lion's Share.
Mose Allison.
Right. Yeah.
Jerry.
I have another question before we go.
Most recently, Chris Robinson from the Black Crowes has been living out in Lagunitas, and he's actually just getting ready to move out of West Marin. But I shot a video of him at his house in Lagunitas, a music video, a year and a half ago. So Marin County is alive and well. Paul, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up.
One more, yeah.
Well, if we have time for one more, then let's go with this one.
Okay.
How, if at all, has the lack of physical music and brick and mortar record shops impacted music today?
That's a tough one. Anyone?
Well, it's been for a lot of musicians since Napster, it's been a steady decline in terms of like music being free, and records. And, in fact, most new cars don't even have a CD player in them. Music is pretty much
9 1 6 7 9 8 7 3 4 7.
Anyway, yeah. It's been hard, and now we have the pandemic, which it really kills live performing, and you see people who want to play have put their stuff up on Facebook, and it's like become a tip jar economy, which is really, to me, it's a little bit sad, I have to say, to kind of see it keep going down like that, because I really, even though I believe in free music and that there should be ways for music to be free, I really, as a musician, really also believe that people who play music and the people who love that music and absorb that music, there should be some kind of reward. There's some kind of financial thing that makes it worthwhile. So, but it's really tough right now, especially for a lot of bands that are playing and that even, recording. People are still recording because they just want to put their stuff down and work in the studio. But you have to you have to get your music out into the world. Records is just like almost like a promotional thing. It's just to sort of send out to in a limited number. People aren't buying records. They're not buying CDs. Most people are listening to music through streaming services and on YouTube. And that's tough for musicians.
You would agree with that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I feel like we're in a really rough spot right now because of declining album sales and Spotify and Pandora. They don't pay royalties to musicians. And now with COVID, we've lost the live performance income. So, it's like we're just sitting here crossing our fingers that some of these live music venues can survive this. Because if they don't, how are young up and coming bands going to hone their chops, develop a following, mature their sound? It's a really it's a very challenging time for musicians.
And the same thing with other artists. As a photographer, I mean, I honed my chops in small nightclubs in San Francisco, the I-Beam on Haight Street, the Berkeley Square in Berkeley, Slims. I shot a lot of club shows, and photographers don't have work, and roadies don't have work, and you've worked. I don't know if you still are employed by Sweetwater. I know you were for a while. All that staff, all those security people, all those backline people, the sound people, it's across the board. I mean, we're hit so hard that, but you are right. In the Bay Area, what you had mentioned about the cost of living going up, when San Francisco got out of control and rents went through the roof during .com 1.0, and all the warehouses where the bands rehearsed in became, server farms and office buildings. All the rehearsal spaces disappeared. And as we all know, San Francisco was born and bred and created on the bohemian lifestyle of everything from the Barbary Coast all the way through to the the beats in North Beach, into the Haight-Ashbury, into the People's Temple, into the 70s. And, there's so much San Francisco history. And all of a sudden, all of that weirdness that makes up San Francisco has evaporated because now it's so expensive to live here. So you lose all the artists, all the writers, and all the photographers, and all the painters and the dancers who can no longer afford a warehouse that was $800 a month to rehearse in or do their art in, or like Dave said when he lost his studio out in Lagunitas, and all of a sudden you're living in the city and you're in one bedroom. You lose the ability to create, and an overhyped economy where real estate is so expensive. It sort of beat the bohemian underbelly of San Francisco back into the ground a number of years ago, and we've recovered on and off here and there, and some of it moved to the East Bay and Oakland and things like that. But it still is, it's still harder and harder for baby bands to come up. Than it's ever been before.
Yeah, I just want to say thing on a positive note. As a journalist, I've been trying to cover, music during the pandemic, which is not always so easy these days if you can't go out and cover concerts so much. But musicians have showed a really remarkable resiliency and creativity. I mean, I did a story on floating concerts in Sausalito where everybody paddles up in their little boat. Somebody had a stage on the back of their houseboat. And then a guy in San Francisco, John Olmsted, did, Jonathan told me about this, I think, backyard sessions using, pretty sophisticated technology, a little stage in his backyard to live stream all the local bands. I was there when Danny Click and the Hell Yeahs were playing, and, he's done that all the way through the summer. So people have shown creativity, and resiliency, even though times have been tough. And I hope that carries over when this passes over. We use some of that experience, to carry on in the post-pandemic music world. So with that, why don't we wrap it up? I want to thank everybody for doing this, especially the panel where you guys were great. Thank you, Jay, for putting all this together, all the great visual images. Yeah, that was wonderful. And Dave, Jonathan, it's a pleasure. I was fascinated by it. I had a lot of fun with it. And with big thanks to Marin Mocha for this great show about Marin's musical legacy and rock history. You can see it either in person or online through November 7th. You can make arrangements and call to make an appointment to see. It's socially distanced. Only a certain number of people are allowed to go in at a time, so it's a safe thing. You go to marinmocha.org, and you can also see it online that way as well. While you're there, you can consider making a donation, or even better, becoming a member and helping that great museum keep up its good work. So I just want to once again thank everybody out there for tuning in. I hope you had as much fun with it as I did. I learned a lot myself, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Right on.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. I had a group of people email me and say they had a reservation to go up, because you need a reservation to do it. They had a small group, and they asked if I would go up and do a walking tour with them while they were up there. And I was on the East Coast, a couple of weeks ago, right when it opened. They were doing it that first weekend. I came back a couple days later, but I think I'm going to go up there maybe the last weekend in October. And so if anybody's interested, reach out to the museum, and maybe some of us can meet up there and do. Dave, I don't know if you're around, or Jonathan or Paul. Maybe we can try and do like a little walking tour one day in the museum. I'm up for it. I'm not speaking on your behalf, but maybe, maybe that last week in October, we can get together and all meet up there and walk through.
I'm planning on going anyway, so that'd be fun. That would be great.
I haven't seen it yet, so I want to go. So I'm throwing that out there to the world. So make your reservations and ask for Jay and Paul and Jonathan and Dave by name.
We'll get you in. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.